mentioned that last year you were just trying to be a quarterback, learn how to play college football. This year, do you feel more confident in yourself as a leader this year, starting a year ago?
Absolutely. I think that was one of my biggest things coming into this offseason was, just trying to be the leader and, kind of try and step into that role and, grow into that mold of taking that next step as a quarterback. I think, there were things that we did well as an offense last year, and, I think we could have taken it to a next step if we had more of that leader at the quarterback position, and I think that was on me. And I think as a freshman, that's a tough thing to do, but that comes with the job description, and so I think taking that next step this year is going to be very pivotal to having a successful season.
Mason, what makes a good leader? What are some of the qualities you feel like?
I think the biggest thing for me is just leading by example. I try to be as vocal as I possibly can, but I think guys respond a lot better to when you say things and you're trying to get them to do things for you, but then there are some guys that'll do that but don't do that and don't reciprocate that. I think that's the biggest thing. Having to kind of setting that standard and having those guys kind of see that visually instead of just me telling them to do it. I think that's the biggest thing for me. And then also vocally, I think just trying to jump guys and push guys to be better. I got to push myself to be better too. But we're only as successful as our weakest link, and I think just pushing each other to be better every day, and it starts with me. And so I think that's the biggest thing for us for sure.
Is there anything you did in the off season to kind of grow that aspect of the game, whether it was talking to veterans or anything like that?
Yeah, I think talking to some of the returning guys, some of the older receivers like CJ and Blue, and then I also think just having that off season of knowing that this is my team and I'm the quarterback going into the season. I didn't have that last year. Just the freshmen coming in and kind of trying to step into my role. I think trying to take that next step has been helpful with those guys because they've pushed me to do that too, and they've been doing a great job of that. But they also have my back and know that I can do it at this level, and so they trust me, and when I can get on them and they don't jaw back, they just do it. I think that's such a great thing for us to be successful.
Mason, the wide receiver room. The wide receiver room looks a bit different from last season. What have your impressions of that group been early, and who do you see jumping out?
Very excited about this group. I think we had a great group last year, but I think we can take it to new lengths this year. I think some of the younger guys are stepping up and playing really well. You think of guys like Bryce Yates, who was, he got a little action last year, but really stepping into a bigger role. Guys like Tony Kinsler and Cam Sapp, a bunch of other young guys. They also, like Malik, coming in from Western, he's going to do a great job. And some of the freshmen too. I think those guys have been really, they've been standing out so far this offseason. And obviously, we didn't have CJ a lot last year, so it's great to have him back. He's such a pivotal part of our offense. He's our oldest guy too, so he's really the leader in that room, and I think that's going to help us a lot. Just to be successful and push the other guys as well. Also bringing Blue back. We're excited. It's going to be a really great group.
Mason, what do you hope to see out of yourself in these next 12 practices?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think Coach Bell and Coach Jacob Floyd and I talk a lot about just being a chain mover and being a very efficient quarterback. I think that was part of the problem of towards the end of last year, just trying to do a little bit too much at times. And I think just playing efficient football and just being a quarterback and not just throwing the football, not just kind of trying to go out there and make plays. Just understanding what the defense is doing, take what they're giving us, and I think just being a very efficient quarterback is my biggest thing coming into this off season and during spring ball. And I think the guys around us are going to really help me take that next step too. I think we got a really great group. Boosie's second year, he's going to be electric. We're really excited about him as well. So I think with the pieces around me, I think we're going to have a really great offseason for sure.
Over the past 2 months, how much did you guys reflect on the way things ended last year, losing through the last 4 games?
That's a great question too. I think we reflected a decent amount. Just how the bowl game went. That was really disappointing for us. I think it starts with me, and everybody kind of played the role of why we were unsuccessful in that game. We tried not to dwell on that so much. I think you can only control what you can control in the future, and that's something that we can learn from for sure. But we got a new group, and we got a great group of guys here, and I think just taking what we did wrong in that game and just using that to get better this offseason, I think is going to be a big step for us. Like I said, just not dwelling on that because there's only so much we can control now. You just keep taking that steps in front of you and get better, and I think we're doing that for sure.
Mason, in the month or so after the bowl, during that span, and what was it about Pitt and this program that made you come back?
Yeah, I think, that month I was just, that was kind of just time for me to debrief and, reflect, like you said, reflect on the season, all that kind of stuff. But, I think just what brought me back is the relationships. There was no doubt in my mind that I wanted to be here. And, what I built with Coach Bell and Coach Dews, honestly, just the rest of the guys on the team, I think we have a really great group here, like a really great group, and I'm really excited for what we can show. And I think that was the biggest thing for me is I'm excited for what we can do here. I'm excited to bring a championship to Pitt. I wholeheartedly believe that we can do that. We're going to get that done.
How much do you and Kate now sort of speak the same language? You know what I mean? Not finish each other's sentences, but I mean, how sort of like tuned in are you guys?
Absolutely, all the time. And, I think that's something. Just the amount of time that we spent around each other, and just how close we've gotten over the past year. Even before that, when I was getting recruited by him, and I just think that he's done such a great job of helping me out and just simplifying things for me at times. But coming into this offseason, I think we're looking to take that next step. And so just trying to gain as much knowledge from him as I possibly can is so essential for us to be successful. I think, like I said, just the guys around us too. I think they do a really great job, and I think him and I really see eye to eye, like you said. I think that's what makes us so special as well.
Mason, how would you describe those conversations? Are they pretty honest? Like, how when you guys interact?
Absolutely. I think that's Coach Bell's biggest thing is just honesty. And there's times where you're not going to like what he's saying. There'll be times where it's a little bit harsh, but it's what you need to hear. And I think that's the best thing for me is just hearing what he thinks, and getting that honest feedback from him is just only going to make me better. And I don't want him to sugarcoat it. If I throw a ball that looks like crap, tell me about it, and we'll talk about it, and we'll fix it, and we'll get better from it. And I think that's the biggest thing with the relationship that him and I have is we can say those things to each other and not get our feelings hurt. We have the best intentions behind it, and we want to move on and get better.
What is a guy like Holden, who's been around college football for a while, added to?
He's great. Holden and I really have a great relationship already, and it's great to have that veteran in our room because I feel like we have a really young group in the quarterback room. So he kind of brings that veteran piece, like you said, and he's always just trying to give us that wisdom that he's gained over the years. He's been to a couple places, and he's a really talented quarterback as well. He's really done a great job of just helping us out, but also he's done a great job of picking up the offense too. I was talking about this with Coach Floyd the other day. He does a really great job of understanding where we want to go with the football and just understanding concepts, all this kind of stuff. So I think him being able to pick up on that early too is just going to help the young guys be better as far as just learning and gaining knowledge of the offense. I think he's really done a great job with that, and he helps me out a lot too. There are things that I may not see that he sees, and we talk about it, and we fix it and be better and help each other out. So
you mentioned the young guys in the room. You were in those shoes this time last year, like Angelo and Corey. I mean, what have they brought to the table, and just how much are they starting to push you and Holden so far?
Absolutely. I think they've really done a great job of coming in and putting in work to try and pick up on the offense. It's not easy to learn this offense, and so they're doing everything that they can to better themselves. And I think that's bettering us as well. They're both really talented throwers in the football, and then you also just really talented quarterbacks. And so I think just having those guys there to push us and help us be better is going to be really, really pivotal for us to be better players. And I'm trying to push myself as much as I can, but it's great to have those guys to push me to be better as well, and they've done a really great job so far.
How's your relationship been like with the O-line and how those guys are looking this year?
Really great. Those guys have done a really great job this offseason and just pushing each other. Some of those guys, it's some of their last seasons, and so that this is the last go for them. And they're going all out, and I love it. I think they've really done a great job. Pushing each other in the weight room and pushing each other when we just do stuff together. And I think we've built a really great relationship off the field as well. And I think that's going to only help us in the long run. And just being able to have each other's backs, trust each other, and to go out and make plays. I think that's going to be such a big thing for our success this year.
Mason, not football related, but how was the floor plunge, and did Olivia actually forget to click record?
Oh, it was a great time. That was so cool for us to be able to do. And I didn't know Olivia and I were going to be going together, but that's when we got there. They said that they wanted us to jump in together, and it was actually me. I forgot to hit record, and so I kind of threw her under the bus a little bit, just playing around. But no, it was great. It's great for the community, and we had a lot of guys there too, which I think is awesome. We had a lot of football players that were able to attend that, and I think that's so cool for the city, and we're excited to do a lot of other things like that as well. Appreciate it, guys.
Thanks,